The consensus after Super Tuesday in March, on which a string of primary elections for the Democratic Party leadership was contested, was overwhelming. Former Secretary of State Clinton had won 7 states, largely in southern and conservative, while Sanders, an experienced Social Democratic senator from Vermont, had won only 4, largely Midwestern and progressive. The cold hard truth, it's game over for Bernie Sanders, said Richard Wolff in The Guardian. Annie Carney wrote for Politico, Clinton's new problem, how to let Bernie down easy. It looked as if it was game over for the left challenger from Vermont and his policies of free tuition and national health service and a $15 per hour minimum wage. But was this narrative just a little bit too convenient for the mainstream media? After all, Clinton's successes in southern conservative states were largely predictable, while Sanders either won or ran very close everywhere else. Were they trying to write Sanders off too soon? As John Nichols writes in The Nation, the Democratic leadership deliberately scheduled its primary debates to keep the primary out of the limelight and boost chances for Clinton and her superior name recognition. The media has largely followed suit until Sanders had a remarkable breakthrough in the New Hampshire primary election. As Giuliani wrote in The Intercept last December in his piece titled, "Where's Bernie?", Sanders has consistently had more support than the Republican candidate Donald Trump, but in terms of media coverage, Trump is besting Sanders 23-1. Yet as Sanders' star has risen, Clinton has been forced to acknowledge him and go on the attack. The burden of her message in this regard is almost the opposite of Obama's vapid hope and change appeal. Deliberately attacking aspirations toward reform, Clinton derided Sanders' support for single-payer healthcare, saying it will never ever come to pass, as CBS reports. No hope, and at best, small change. But that should be no problem, after all. Isn't that just what is electable? In a major interview with The Guardian and the Financial Times, Britain's long-departed former Prime Minister Tony Blair stuck his oar in again, attacking both Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. "I'm not sure I fully understand politics right now," he offered, arguing that both candidates were hampered by the question of electability. He's not the first to raise this concern about Sanders. Jay Michelson, writing for the Daily Beast, argues that a vote for him is a vote for Donald Trump. Alan Draper in Market Watch offers an almost identical verdict. A vote for Bernie Sanders is a vote for Donald Trump. But polls consistently show that Sanders would defeat the Republicans by a far wider margin than Clinton. As the Huffington Post reported, Bernie Sanders destroys Donald Trump by 13 points, 6 more than Clinton. By October 2015, the Democrat supporting website The Daily Kos announced the electability argument is dead. All the polls show Bernie does better against GOP than Hillary. Most embarrassingly for Hillary Clinton, the former Labour Secretary in Bill Clinton's 1990s administration, Robert Reich, came out to defend Sanders' electability. As he pointed out, according to the latest polls, Bernie is the strongest Democratic candidate in the general election, defeating both Donald Trump and Ted Cruz in hypothetical matchups. The polls showed Bernie beating Trump by a larger margin than Hillary Clinton beats Trump, and Bernie beating Cruz while Hillary loses to Cruz. Still, some have been hanging on to the argument that Sanders' social democratic ideology would eventually make him unelectable. Monica Bauer in the Huffington Post fancied that Sanders' open dismissal of capitalism makes him pretty much unelectable in a general election. Michelle Goldberg, a prominent Clinton supporter writing at Slate, argues that once voters have a fully formed idea of him or his political history, Sanders' approval ratings will tank. Thus far, there is no sign of such a plunge. In New Hampshire, a typical bellwether state where Clinton was expected to win, Sanders took an overwhelming 20% lead and, as the New York Times reported, led among all demographics except voters and families earning over $200,000 per year. Independent voters, who are usually regarded as fodder for centrist politicians, are far more likely to back Sanders. As early as October last year, Nate Cohn wrote in the New York Times, "Voters who identify as independents are far likelier to support Mr. Sanders." In a recent NBC Marist poll, Mr. Sanders led Mrs. Clinton by a huge margin, 59-21, among self-identified independent voters. Some of the primary voting patterns support this. In Massachusetts, which Hillary Clinton won by a small margin, Sanders won outright among independents and among those who identified as very liberal and those who identified as moderate, as CNN shows in its exit poll report. Those claiming that Sanders is unelectable are inhabiting another era. This isn't a 1990s electorate, and a lot of Americans, especially the young, are moving to the left. Another line of attack on Sanders, perpetuated by Clinton supporters in the establishment media, is that his support base is too male and sexist. A prototype of this attack came in a satirical piece by Robinson Meyer in The Atlantic. "Here comes the Berniebro," she wrote, implying that the average Sanders supporter was a swaggeringly entitled male misogynist. It would be surprising if such characters didn't exist on the internet, and Sanders repudiated any such support, saying, "We don't want that crap." But was there any preponderance of such people among Sanders supporters? As Vox points out, the gender gap was actually a generational gap. White older women prefer Clinton. Young women are going for Clinton's rival, Bernie Sanders, by an overwhelming margin. When Sanders' lead among young women was pointed out, leading liberal feminist Gloria Steinem stepped in to suggest that they only supported him to get dates because the boys are with Bernie. The idea that Clinton's record of opposition to abortion rights and gay rights may play a role here was simply not entertained. As Time magazine reported, Steinem later apologized for this sexist slur, saying she misspoke. At any rate, the proof of the pudding was in the voting, and when it came down to it, as NBC reported, Clinton faltered with women in her first major defeat in New Hampshire, where Sanders won by a wide margin among women voters. A more accurate criticism of Sanders' campaign, however, is that he has struggled to connect to black voters. News outlets from the Washington Post to CNN have regularly, and sometimes gleefully, spoken of Sanders' problem with black voters. In June 2015, this problem looked all too real, as CNN reported that just 2% of black Democrats backed Sanders, and only 9% of all non-whites did. What is the context for this? Early in his campaign, Sanders took heat from Black Lives Matter activists who challenged his limited agenda on race politics. To his credit, Sanders took on board these criticisms, called for the rollback of mass incarceration, and recanted on his previous vote for Bill Clinton's Violent Crime Control Act, which accelerated black imprisonment drastically. He advocated investment for jobs instead of prison, and told CNN that Sandra Bland would not have been killed by police if she were white. Yet Clinton, whom the media had largely let off the hook, had a lot more to answer for than Sanders. As a major figure in her husband's administration, she had played a leading role in imposing the Violent Crime Control Act. As part of the ideological justification for this, Clinton argued that the nation faced the threat of young black criminals.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
She had also taken a leading role in draconian welfare reforms, essentially replacing welfare with workfare, another policy that disproportionately hurt black people, particularly poor black women. As Daniel DENVIR reports in Salon, she sold out working women and then never apologized. She was proud of her role in ensuring the deadbeats were made to work for their pittance. Finally, her 2008 campaign against Barack Obama relied upon racist undertones, as Ryan Cooper pointed out in The Week. And most of this had been quietly ignored by the same media who did their best to pile onto Sanders' problems with black voters. But gradually the criticisms mounted. Leading black intellectuals like Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, argued that Hillary Clinton doesn't deserve the black vote. Erica Garner, the daughter of a black man murdered by police on camera, came out for Bernie Sanders, as CNN shows, telling the Washington Post that establishment Democrats who claimed to represent her had let her down, backing a system that criminalizes blackness. Yet Clinton continued to enjoy a firewall of support on this issue from the media and black Democratic leaders. As late as January 2016, the Latin Post reported that Clinton led among blacks and Latinos, despite Sanders' efforts to reach out to those younger, poorer voters left out by the black political establishment. Sanders was able to soften Clinton's lead so that in a number of primaries, the figures baffled the Clinton camp. In Massachusetts, exit polls reported on CNN suggested that Sanders' support among non-whites had risen to 41%. In Nevada, NBC's exit polling reported Sanders won among Latino voters by 8 percentage points over Clinton. This angered the Clinton campaign, whose press secretary derided the figures as complete and utter bullshit, as Politico reports. But these effects were largely visible in the North. Sanders was unable to break Clinton's near monopoly among black voters in the South, which included 4/5 of black voters in South Carolina. Even so, Sanders, who began the fight with 3% support nationally, continues, as of recording, to be a serious competitor to Clinton. Why is this? As Ronald Brownstein reports in The Atlantic, while Clinton holds on to the votes of older voters, Sanders has the overwhelming support of the young, and indeed dominates the vote among those under the age of 45. One reason for this is that younger voters aren't put off by Sanders' self-identification as a socialist. As Nate Silver at 538 points out, those aged 18 to 29 years old are the only age demographic that has a net favourable impression of socialism. Ken Walsh at the US News and World Report highlights more polling data that shows 58% of young people choose socialism over capitalism as the most compassionate system. But another part of the story is class. As Jeff Stein writes for Vox, class is the main reason Sanders won in the state of Oklahoma and narrowly lost in Massachusetts. If low-income voters had been as big a share of the electorate in Massachusetts as they were in Oklahoma, Sanders could have won Massachusetts. That is the bottom line. In the America following the credit crunch, Sanders' attacks on the billionaire class resonate with the young and poor, and he has created a crack in the traditional dominance of the Democratic Party establishment.